Catherine sat quietly in her private dressing room at Windsor Castle, staring at the elegant emerald green coat hanging before her. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting a gentle glow on the carefully chosen outfit that would soon carry a message far more profound than anyone could imagine. Her fingers traced the delicate fabric, and memories flooded back to a Christmas 25 years ago when she was just a young girl named Kate Middleton. The coat was more than just a beautiful piece of clothing. It was a symbol, a bridge between her past and present, and, most importantly, a tribute to someone who had shaped her into the woman she had become. As she prepared for the Christmas Day service at St. George's Chapel, Catherine's mind wandered to her beloved grandmother, Rose, who had passed away just 6 months earlier. Rose Middleton had been a remarkable woman. Born in 1932, she had lived through World War II, witnessed the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and had seen the world transform in ways she never could have imagined as a young girl. But what made Rose truly special was not the history she had witnessed, but the love she had poured into her family, particularly into her granddaughter Catherine. Catherine remembered the Christmas of 1998 vividly. She was 16 years old, struggling with the pressures of teenage life and the expectations that came with her family's growing social status. Her parents, Michael and Carol, had worked hard to build their party planning business, and the family was finally enjoying the fruits of their labor. But, with success came scrutiny, and Catherine often felt the weight of being perfect, of never making mistakes. That December morning had been particularly difficult. Catherine had woken up feeling overwhelmed by the upcoming school term, the pressure of her studies, and the social dynamics that seemed to consume her teenage world. She had planned to spend Christmas morning in bed, avoiding the family gathering that her mother had organized with their usual enthusiasm and attention to detail. Rose had knocked gently on Catherine's bedroom door at their family home in Bucklebury. When Catherine called for her to come in, her grandmother entered carrying a cup of tea and wearing the most beautiful emerald green coat Catherine had ever seen. The coat was vintage, clearly from another era, but it fit Rose perfectly and made her look absolutely radiant. "My darling girl," Rose had said, settling on the edge of Catherine's bed, "I have something to tell you about this coat." Catherine had looked up from under her covers, immediately drawn to the rich color and elegant cut of the garment. "It's beautiful, Grandmama. Where did you get it?" Rose smiled, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom that comes from decades of life experience. "This coat was given to me by your grandfather on our first Christmas together as a married couple in 1953. We had very little money then. He was just starting his career, and I was working as a secretary to help make ends meet. But Harold had saved every penny he could for months to buy me something special." She paused, smoothing the fabric with her weathered hands. "When he presented it to me on Christmas morning, I cried. Not because it was expensive, though it was more than we could really afford, but because of what it represented. He told me that green was the color of hope, of new beginnings, and of the life we would build together." Catherine sat up in bed, suddenly interested despite her teenage sullenness. "What happened then?" "We wore our finest clothes to Christmas service that year, even though we were the youngest and probably the poorest people in that grand old church. But when I put on this coat, I felt like I could conquer the world. Not because of how I looked, but because I remembered who I was and what I was capable of achieving." Rose reached over and took Catherine's hand. "You see, my dear, clothing is never just about fashion. When we choose to wear something special, we're telling the world who we are and what we stand for. We're honoring the people who love us and the values they've taught us." That Christmas morning, Rose had convinced Catherine to join the family for their traditional Christmas walk through the Berkshire countryside. Catherine had reluctantly agreed, throwing on jeans and a sweater, but she couldn't stop thinking about her grandmother's words. As they walked through the frost-covered fields, Rose linking arms with her granddaughter, she continued to share stories of Christmases past. "I wore this coat every Christmas for the first 10 years of my marriage," Rose explained as they paused to watch a robin perched on a fence post. "Through good times and difficult ones. The Christmas when your grandfather lost his job, the Christmas when I had my first miscarriage, the Christmas when your father was born. This coat saw it all." Catherine looked at her grandmother with new eyes. She had always known Rose was special, but she was beginning to understand the depth of her strength and wisdom. "Why are you telling me this, Grandmama?" Catherine asked. Rose stopped walking and turned to face her granddaughter fully. "Because I see you struggling, my darling. I see you trying so hard to be perfect, to meet everyone's expectations, to never disappoint anyone. But perfection isn't what makes a person remarkable. It's authenticity, kindness, and the courage to be yourself even when the world is watching." They continued their walk in comfortable silence for a while, the winter air crisp and clean around them. Catherine found herself really looking at the countryside for the first time in months, noticing the beauty in the bare trees, the way the frost made everything sparkle, the peaceful quiet that seemed to settle over the world on Christmas morning. "I want to give you something," Rose said suddenly, as they approached a small stone bridge over a babbling brook. "But not the coat itself. That will come to you someday when I'm no longer here to wear it. Today, I want to give you the lesson the coat taught me." Catherine waited, sensing this was a moment she would remember forever. The most important outfit you can ever wear is confidence in who you are and compassion for others. "Everything else is just decoration," Rose said simply. "When you remember that, you'll never worry about fitting in again, because you'll be too busy making a difference." They spent the rest of that Christmas day together, Rose telling stories of her youth, her courtship with Catherine's grandfather, the early days of raising Catherine's father, and the countless small moments that had made up a life well lived. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, feeling lighter and more hopeful about her future. That evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Catherine noticed how Rose commanded the room without ever raising her voice or demanding attention. She simply listened with genuine interest when others spoke, offered comfort when someone shared a worry, and radiated a kind of peaceful strength that drew people to her. "How does she do it?" Catherine whispered to her father as they watched Rose help Catherine's younger siblings with a jigsaw puzzle. Michael Middleton followed his daughter's gaze to his mother and smiled. "Your grandmother learned a long time ago that true elegance comes from how you treat people, not from what you own or where you come from. She's never forgotten what it felt like to be young and uncertain, so she makes everyone feel valued and understood." As the years passed, Catherine carried that Christmas lesson with her through the challenges of young adulthood. When she started at the University of St. Andrews, when she met William, when she navigated the complexities of dating someone in the public eye, and especially during those difficult early years when the media scrutinized her every move, she remembered her grandmother's words about authenticity and compassion. Rose had been Catherine's confidant through it all. When the relationship with William hit rough patches, Rose reminded her that real love required patience and understanding. When the media dubbed her Weighty Katie, Rose helped her see that taking time to be sure about such an important decision was a sign of wisdom, not weakness. When Catherine felt overwhelmed by the prospect of joining the royal family, Rose assured her that she had been raised with exactly the values she would need to serve others with grace. Now, 25 years later, Catherine sat in Windsor Castle preparing for Christmas service as the Princess of Wales. Rose had passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous June, still wearing her emerald green coat during her final Christmas the year before. True to her word, Rose had left the coat to Catherine, along with a letter that Catherine had read countless times since the funeral. "My dearest Catherine," the letter began in Rose's familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, then I have gone to join your grandfather, and this coat has found its way to you as I always intended. I hope you will wear it with pride, not because it is expensive or fashionable, but because it carries the love of generations of women who understood that true beauty comes from service to others." The letter continued with specific memories Rose wanted Catherine to carry forward, lessons about resilience during difficult times, and hopes for Catherine's future role as a mother and public figure. But it was the final paragraph that had brought Catherine to tears every time she read it. "You have grown into exactly the woman I prayed you would become. You lead with your heart, you treat everyone with dignity regardless of their station in life, and you understand that privilege is responsibility, not entitlement. When you wear this coat, remember that you carry not just my love, but the hopes of every young girl who needs to believe that kindness and authenticity matter more than perfection." Catherine stood up from her dressing chair and approached the emerald green coat. The style had been updated slightly by the royal dressmakers to suit the current fashion while maintaining the classic elegance that had made it so special to Rose. As she slipped her arms through the sleeves, Catherine felt the familiar comfort of her grandmother's presence. Today's Christmas service would be particularly meaningful. It would be the first Christmas since Rose's passing, and Catherine had chosen to honor her grandmother's memory by wearing the coat and by making an announcement that she knew would have made Rose proud. After months of planning and preparation, Catherine was ready to reveal a new charitable initiative focused on supporting grandparents who were raising grandchildren due to family crises. The idea had come to Catherine during one of her visits to a family support center earlier that year. She had met several elderly people who had stepped in to raise their grandchildren when parents were unable to care for them due to illness, addiction, or other challenges. Their stories had reminded Catherine of the profound impact grandparents could have on young lives, just as Rose had influenced her own journey. As Catherine fastened the coat's buttons, she thought about the message she wanted to send today. The outfit choice would inevitably be photographed and analyzed by fashion experts and royal watchers around the world. But Catherine hoped that anyone who took the time to learn the story behind the coat would understand that it represented something far more important than style. The coat represented the power of intergenerational love, the wisdom that comes from listening to those who have lived longer and experienced more, and the importance of honoring the people who shape us into who we become. It represented the idea that true elegance is timeless because it comes from character rather than trends. Catherine checked her reflection one final time, adjusting the simple pearl earrings that had also belonged to Rose. She thought about all the Christmas mornings yet to come, when she would share Rose's stories with her own children, helping them understand the remarkable woman who had helped shape their mother's values and worldview. The Princess of Wales took a deep breath, smoothed the emerald fabric one last time, and prepared to step into the role that Rose had unknowingly prepared her for decades earlier. Today, she would wear her grandmother's coat not just as a tribute to the past, but as a promise for the future, a commitment to carry forward the lessons of authenticity, compassion, and service that had been passed down through generations of remarkable women. As Catherine walked toward the door of her dressing room, she whispered a quiet thank you to the grandmother who had taught her that the most important outfit anyone could wear was the confidence to be genuinely, authentically themselves while dedicating their life to lifting others up. The emerald green coat rustled softly as she moved, carrying with it the love, wisdom, and hopes of a woman whose influence would continue to shape the royal family for generations to come. The corridors of Windsor Castle echoed with Catherine's footsteps as she made her way toward the private family quarters where William and the children were waiting. The emerald green coat moved gracefully with each step, and Catherine could almost feel Rose's presence walking beside her. The morning sun streamed through the ancient windows, creating patterns of light that danced across the stone walls and reminded Catherine of the countless royal Christmases these halls had witnessed. William looked up from helping George adjust his tie when Catherine entered the sitting room. For a moment, he simply stared, recognizing immediately that this was not just another royal outfit but something deeply personal and meaningful. After 14 years of marriage, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when Catherine was honoring someone special or carrying forward a family tradition. The emerald coat, he said softly, understanding immediately. Today feels right for it. Catherine nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Rose always said that Christmas was about remembering the love that surrounds us, even when we can't see it anymore. I thought today would be the perfect day to carry her with us in a visible way. Princess Charlotte, now 10 years old and increasingly aware of the significance behind her mother's choices, approached Catherine with curiosity. "Mama, you look beautiful. Is that the special coat you told us about? The one that belonged to great-grandmama Rose?" Catherine knelt down to Charlotte's level, careful not to wrinkle the precious fabric. "Yes, darling. This coat has a very special story, and someday, when you're older, I'll tell you all about the Christmas morning when great-grandmama Rose taught me one of the most important lessons of my life." Prince George, 13 and growing more thoughtful about family history with each passing year, looked up from his phone. "What was great-grandmama Rose like when you were young, Mama?" "I remember her being kind and always having sweets in her pockets, but I wish I had known her better." Catherine's heart ached with the familiar pain of loss mixed with gratitude for the memories they did have. Rose had passed away when Louis was only 7, Charlotte was 9, and George was 12. While they had known her love, they hadn't had the chance to truly understand the remarkable woman she had been or to benefit from her wisdom the way Catherine had during her formative years. "She was exactly like you remember, but so much more," Catherine began, settling into a chair so she could properly share memories with her children. Great-grandmama Rose had this incredible ability to make everyone feel special and important. "When I was your age, Charlotte, I sometimes felt invisible at school. I wasn't the smartest or the prettiest or the most talented at anything particular. But when I was with Rose, she made me feel like I could accomplish anything. Prince Louis, 9 years old and still young enough to be completely honest about his feelings, climbed onto the arm of Catherine's chair. I miss her. She always remembered exactly what I liked and never treated me like a baby. She saw each of you as the unique individuals you are, Catherine continued, wrapping an arm around Louis. Rose believed that every person has something special to offer the world, and it was her gift to help people discover what that something was. William sat down across from his family, watching Catherine share memories with their children. He had loved Rose dearly and credited her with helping Catherine become the woman and mother she was today. Rose had been present for every major milestone in their relationship, from their engagement to their wedding to the birth of each of their children. Her absence during this first Christmas was felt deeply by everyone who had known her. Tell us about the coat, George requested, genuinely interested. At 13, he was beginning to understand that objects could carry emotional significance beyond their practical purpose. Catherine looked down at the emerald fabric, running her fingers along the elegant lines of the garment. This coat was a Christmas gift from your great-great-grandfather Harold to Rose on their first Christmas as a married couple. They had very little money at the time, but he had saved for months to buy her something beautiful. She paused, remembering how Rose's eyes had sparkled when she first told this story decades earlier. But what made it special wasn't the cost or even how beautiful it was. It was what it represented. Harold told Rose that green was the color of hope and new beginnings. Every time she wore it, she remembered that their love was strong enough to build a wonderful life together, no matter what challenges they might face. Charlotte reached out to touch the fabric gently. It's so soft. Did great-grandmama Rose wear it every Christmas? For many years, yes. Through happy Christmases and difficult ones. She wore it when your grandfather Michael was born, when Harold lost his job and they weren't sure how they would pay their bills, when I was born, and when each of you were born, if she could be there. William leaned forward, adding to the story. I remember the first Christmas I spent with your mama's family. Rose was wearing this coat, and I was terrified because I wanted so much for her family to like me. Rose took me aside and told me that anyone who made Catherine happy the way I clearly did would always be welcome in their family. Catherine smiled at the memory. That Christmas had been a turning point in their relationship, when William realized that Catherine's family would love and accept him not because of his title, but because of who he was as a person and how he treated Catherine. What I want you to understand about this coat, Catherine continued, is that it represents the kind of love that lasts beyond a lifetime. Rose wore it to show respect for the man who loved her and to remember the promises they made to each other. Today, I'm wearing it to honor her memory and to remember the promises I made to myself about the kind of mother and person I want to be. The family finished their preparations in comfortable togetherness, each child asking more questions about Rose and the family stories that connected them to previous generations. Catherine found herself sharing memories she hadn't thought about in years, stories about Rose's garden where she grew vegetables during World War II, her volunteer work at the local hospital, and the way she always made Christmas dinner feel magical even during years when money was tight. As they prepared to leave for the church service, Catherine caught sight of herself in the ornate mirror that had hung in the same location for over a century. For just a moment, she could see Rose in her reflection, not in her physical features, but in the confidence and grace that came from knowing she was carrying forward something precious and important. The short drive to St. George's Chapel was filled with excited chatter from the children about Christmas dinner, presents, and the cousins they would see later in the day. But Catherine found herself thinking about the announcement she would make after the service, the charitable initiative that had been months in planning and that she knew would honor Rose's memory in the most meaningful way possible. During one of their last conversations, Rose had expressed concern about the increasing number of grandparents who were raising grandchildren due to family crises. She had met several such grandparents through her volunteer work at the community center, and their stories had touched her heart deeply. These are people who thought they had finished raising children, Rose had told Catherine during a quiet afternoon tea in her garden. They're often in their 60s or 70s, living on fixed incomes, and, suddenly, they're responsible for energetic young children who have already experienced trauma or loss. They need support, but they're often too proud to ask for help. Rose had suggested that there should be better resources for these families, financial assistance, counseling services, educational support, and social activities that would help both the grandparents and the children feel less isolated. Catherine had listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions, not realizing at the time that this would become the foundation for her next major charitable project. As their car pulled up to St. George's Chapel, Catherine could see the crowds of well-wishers gathered despite the cold December morning. The sight of people who had given up their Christmas morning to share in this tradition never failed to move her. Many of them were families with children, elderly couples, and individuals who had traveled considerable distances just to be part of this moment. "Look, Mama," Charlotte whispered, pointing to an elderly woman near the front of the crowd who was waving enthusiastically. "She reminds me of great-grandmama Rose." Catherine followed Charlotte's gaze and saw a woman who appeared to be in her 80s, bundled in a warm coat and holding the hand of a young boy who was probably her grandson. The sight brought tears to Catherine's eyes as she thought about how many grandparents like Rose were quietly playing crucial roles in children's lives all around the world. As the family exited their vehicle and began walking toward the chapel entrance, Catherine made brief eye contact with the elderly woman Charlotte had noticed. The woman's face lit up with such pure joy that Catherine felt compelled to approach her despite the security protocols that usually kept the royal family at a distance from the crowds. "Good morning," Catherine said warmly, stepping closer to the barrier. "Merry Christmas to you and your grandson." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Your Royal Highness, this is such an honor. This is my grandson Tommy. His parents are deployed overseas with the military, so we're spending Christmas together." Catherine looked down at Tommy, who appeared to be about 6 years old and was staring up at her with wide eyes. "What a lucky boy you are to have Christmas with your grandmother. I hope you're having a wonderful day together." "Grandmama makes the best Christmas pudding in the whole world," Tommy said seriously, causing both women to laugh. Catherine's heart swelled as she watched the obvious love between grandmother and grandson. This was exactly the type of relationship she wanted to support through her new charitable initiative, grandparents stepping in to provide love and stability when circumstances required it. "She sounds like a very special lady," Catherine told Tommy before turning back to his grandmother. "Thank you for being here today. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas together." As they continued toward the chapel, William walked beside Catherine, having observed the entire interaction. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Rose would have loved seeing you connect with them." Catherine nodded, feeling the weight of the emerald coat and the responsibility it represented. "I think she somehow arranged that meeting. Rose always believed in the power of unexpected moments to remind us what really matters." The chapel bells began to ring, calling the congregation to worship and marking the official beginning of Christmas Day for the royal family. As Catherine took her place beside William in the chapel, surrounded by their children and extended family, she felt Rose's presence more strongly than ever. The service itself was beautiful, filled with traditional carols and readings that had marked Christmas at Windsor Castle for generations. Catherine found herself thinking not just about the religious significance of the day, but about the continuity of love and tradition that connected past, present, and future. When it came time for the final carol, Silent Night, Catherine's voice joined with hundreds of others in the familiar words. As she sang, she thought about all the Christmas mornings when Rose had sung these same songs, first as a young bride, then as a mother, and, finally, as a grandmother and great-grandmother who had lived to see her family grow and flourish. The emerald green coat seemed to wrap Catherine not just in warmth, but in the accumulated love of all the women who had come before her and all the lessons they had learned about what truly mattered in life. As the service concluded and the family prepared to greet the crowds outside, Catherine felt ready to share Rose's legacy with the world in a way that would create positive change for countless families. The morning was far from over, and the most meaningful part of Catherine's tribute to her grandmother was still to come. As the chapel doors opened and the royal family emerged into the crisp December air, Catherine was struck by the sea of faces that greeted them. The crowd had grown even larger during the service, with people of all ages bundled in warm clothing, many holding small British flags and others simply smiling with the joy that seemed to permeate Christmas morning. The emerald green coat caught the winter sunlight, and Catherine noticed several photographers capturing the moment, though she knew they had no idea of the deeply personal story behind her outfit choice. The traditional Christmas walkabout began, with the family splitting up to cover more ground and spend time with as many well-wishers as possible. Catherine found herself drawn to the families with multiple generations present, her mind already focused on the announcement she would make later in the day. Each grandmother she met reminded her of Rose in some way, their patient smiles, their protective stance near their grandchildren, their obvious pride in their families. "Your Royal Highness, might I present my mother, Eleanor," said a middle-aged woman who had been waiting near the chapel steps. "She's 87 and has been looking forward to this day for months." Catherine approached Eleanor, who was seated in a wheelchair but whose eyes sparkled with alertness and warmth. "Eleanor, what a pleasure to meet you. Are you enjoying Christmas morning?" "Oh, my dear," Eleanor said, reaching for Catherine's gloved hand, "this is the highlight of my entire year. I've been coming to the Christmas service for 40 years, and it never gets old. You look absolutely radiant in that beautiful coat." Catherine squeezed Eleanor's hand gently. "Thank you so much. This coat belonged to my grandmother, and wearing it today feels like having her here with me." Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. "Grandmothers are treasures, aren't they? I have 6 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. 3 of my grandchildren live with me now since their parents divorced. It's been an adjustment, but they keep me young." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. Here was another example of the exact situation her new charity would address. That must be both challenging and rewarding. "How are you managing?" "Some days are harder than others," Eleanor admitted honestly. "The youngest is only 5, and I'm not as spry as I used to be. But we have each other, and that's what matters most. The community center has been helpful with after-school programs, but there aren't many resources specifically for families like ours." Catherine made mental notes of everything Eleanor was sharing, knowing this real-world perspective would be invaluable for refining her charitable initiative. "You're doing something incredibly important and loving. I hope you know how much your grandchildren appreciate what you're doing for them." Eleanor's daughter leaned closer. "She's being modest, Your Royal Highness. Mom has completely reorganized her life for these children. She's learned to use a computer to help with homework, she drives them to football practice even though she hates driving in traffic, and she's taken parenting classes to understand how to help children who have experienced family upheaval." Catherine felt tears threatening to fall as she listened to this story that echoed so many others she had heard during her research. "Eleanor, you are extraordinary. Your grandchildren are incredibly fortunate to have someone who loves them so completely." As Catherine continued along the line of well-wishers, she encountered story after story that reinforced her belief in the importance of the charity she was preparing to announce. There was Margaret, 68, who had taken in her 3 grandchildren when her daughter died in a car accident. There was Robert, 72, who was raising his grandson while his son served a prison sentence. There was Patricia, 75, who had moved across the country to care for her granddaughter when her daughter struggled with mental illness. Each story was different, but they all shared common threads: older adults who had stepped up during family crises, children who needed stability and love, and a lack of adequate support systems for these unique family situations. Catherine realized that Rose would have known exactly what to say to each of these grandparents, how to encourage them and validate the enormous sacrifices they were making. William appeared at Catherine's side as she finished speaking with a young boy whose grandfather had brought him to the Christmas service. "You've been having quite a few meaningful conversations," he observed, having noticed how deeply engaged Catherine had been with several families. "Every person I've spoken to today has reinforced why this afternoon's announcement is so important," Catherine replied quietly. Rose was right about the need for better support for grandparent-headed families. Hearing these stories firsthand just makes it more urgent. After spending nearly an hour with the crowds, the royal family made their way back to Windsor Castle for the traditional Christmas lunch. The Great Hall had been decorated with garlands of holly and ivy, and the long table was set with the finest china and crystal. Despite the formal setting, the atmosphere was warm and familial, with conversations flowing naturally and children's laughter punctuating the meal. Catherine found herself seated next to Princess Anne, who had always been someone she could confide in about charitable work and public service. As they enjoyed the first course, Catherine shared some of the stories she had heard that morning and her plans for the afternoon announcement. "It sounds like a cause Rose would have been passionate about," Anne said thoughtfully. "She always had a soft spot for children who needed extra support, and she understood better than most how much grandparents contribute to family stability." "I keep thinking about something she told me years ago," Catherine said, adjusting the emerald coat she had chosen to wear throughout the day. She said that the most important legacy we can leave is not what we accomplished for ourselves, but what we made possible for others. This charity feels like a way to honor that belief. And nodded approvingly. The timing is perfect too. With so many families facing challenges in today's world, grandparents are often the unsung heroes holding everything together. Giving them proper support and recognition is overdue. As lunch concluded, Catherine excused herself to make final preparations for the announcement. She had scheduled a brief press conference for mid-afternoon, timed so that the news could be included in Christmas Day broadcasts but wouldn't overshadow the morning's religious observance. In her private study, Catherine reviewed her notes one final time. The charity, which would be called Rose's Legacy, supporting grandparent families, had been developed over 6 months with input from social workers, child psychologists, financial advisors, and, most importantly, grandparents who were currently raising grandchildren. The initiative would provide financial assistance, educational resources, respite care, legal support, and social activities designed to reduce isolation and build community among these families. Catherine had also arranged for the charity to partner with existing organizations rather than creating entirely new infrastructure. This approach would allow them to maximize impact while minimizing administrative costs, ensuring that donations would go directly to helping families rather than supporting bureaucracy. The funding would come from a combination of sources: private donations, corporate partnerships, government grants, and proceeds from a special collection of children's books that Catherine was commissioning. The books would feature stories about the special relationship between grandparents and grandchildren, with all profits supporting the charity's work. As Catherine prepared for the press conference, she thought about Rose's reaction to these plans. Her grandmother had always believed in practical solutions to real problems, and Catherine knew she would have appreciated the comprehensive approach they had developed. Rose would have especially loved the idea of the children's books, as she had been an avid reader who had instilled a love of literature in Catherine and her siblings. The press conference was held in the castle's blue drawing room, with a small group of carefully selected journalists and photographers. Catherine had chosen this intimate setting deliberately, wanting the focus to be on the substance of the announcement rather than the grandeur of the surroundings. When Catherine entered the room, still wearing Rose's emerald coat, the assembled media immediately understood that this was not just another royal announcement but something deeply personal. The way Catherine carried herself, the careful choice of location, and, most obviously, the significance of the coat itself all signaled that this moment had special meaning. "Thank you all for joining me on Christmas Day," Catherine began, her voice clear and confident. "I want to share with you today something that has been very close to my heart, particularly as we approach the first Christmas since my grandmother Rose passed away earlier this year." She paused, allowing her genuine emotion to show. "Many of you have asked about this emerald coat, and I want to tell you that it belonged to my grandmother. She wore it every Christmas for decades, and it represented for her the love, hope, and commitment that defined her approach to family and life." Catherine went on to explain the story behind the coat, sharing some of the lessons Rose had taught her and connecting those values to the work she was announcing. Rose spent her final years volunteering with families in crisis, and she became particularly concerned about grandparents who find themselves raising grandchildren due to various family circumstances. The room was completely silent as Catherine described the challenges these families faced and the lack of adequate support systems. She shared some of the stories she had heard that morning, being careful to protect the privacy of the families involved while illustrating the real need for assistance. "Today, I am honored to announce the launch of Rose's Legacy, supporting grandparent families," Catherine continued, outlining the comprehensive services the charity would provide. "This initiative is my tribute to my grandmother's belief that love and support should be available to every child, and that the adults who step up to provide that love deserve our recognition and assistance." She described the various components of the charity, from financial assistance to educational programs, and explained how people could get involved either as volunteers or donors. Catherine also announced that she would be making regular visits to grandparent-headed families to better understand their needs and ensure the charity remained responsive to real-world challenges. "Wearing my grandmother's coat today is not just about honoring her memory," Catherine concluded. "It's about carrying forward her commitment to service and her belief that we all have a responsibility to support the most vulnerable members of our society. These grandparents are heroes who deserve our admiration and our practical support." The questions that followed were thoughtful and substantive, focusing on the mechanics of how the charity would operate and the specific needs it would address. Catherine answered each question with the thoroughness that came from months of careful preparation and genuine passion for the cause. As the press conference concluded, Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction and connection to Rose's memory. The emerald coat had carried her through this important moment, and she knew that her grandmother would have been proud of both the announcement and the way it had been presented. The rest of Christmas Day was spent in quiet celebration with family, but Catherine's mind was already moving forward to the work that lay ahead. The charity would officially launch in the new year, and she knew it would require significant time and attention to ensure its success. But, as she looked around the table at her own children and thought about all the grandparents who would benefit from Rose's legacy, Catherine felt energized by the prospect of turning grief into positive action. The emerald coat hung carefully in Catherine's dressing room that evening, having fulfilled its special purpose for the day. But Catherine knew this was just the beginning of how Rose's influence would continue to shape her work and her approach to public service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, and Catherine was ready to meet them with the wisdom and grace her grandmother had taught her to carry forward. 3 months had passed since Catherine's Christmas Day announcement, and the response to Rose's legacy had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. As she sat in her office at Kensington Palace on a rainy March morning, surrounded by letters, emails, and reports about the charity's early work, Catherine reflected on how much had changed since that meaningful Christmas Day when she first wore Rose's emerald coat in public. The coat itself hung in a place of honor in Catherine's private study, carefully preserved but ready to be worn again when special occasions called for Rose's presence to be felt. Catherine had already decided that she would wear it to the charity's first major fundraising gala in June, and again on the anniversary of Rose's passing. The coat had become more than clothing. It was a tangible reminder of the values and commitments that guided Catherine's approach to her royal duties. The morning's schedule included a visit to the Riverside Community Centre in East London, where Catherine would meet with 3 grandparent-headed families who had been among the first to receive support from Rose's legacy. These visits had become a regular part of Catherine's work, allowing her to see firsthand how the charity was making a difference and to identify areas where services might need to be adjusted or expanded. Catherine's assistant, Laura, knocked softly on the office door. "Ma'am, the car is ready, and I have the files for today's families. I thought you might want to review them once more during the drive." Catherine gathered her things, choosing a simple navy dress and jacket for the visit. While she loved the symbolic power of Rose's emerald coat, she had learned that for these family meetings, it was better to dress in a way that felt approachable and non-intimidating. The goal was to help families feel comfortable sharing their experiences honestly, not to create additional formality or distance. During the 40-minute drive through London traffic, Catherine reviewed the 3 family profiles. The first family consisted of 72-year-old Dorothy Williams and her 2 grandchildren, ages 8 and 11, whose mother had died in a car accident and whose father was unable to care for them due to his struggles with alcoholism. Dorothy had retired early from her job as a school secretary to become their full-time guardian, and Rose's legacy had provided financial assistance for childcare, educational support, and counseling services for all 3 family members. The second family was headed by 68-year-old James Patterson, a widower who had taken custody of his 4-year-old grandson when his son was deployed to Afghanistan and his daughter-in-law struggled with severe postpartum depression. James had never expected to be changing diapers and attending preschool parent meetings at his age, but he had embraced the challenge with determination and love. The charity had connected him with other grandfather caregivers and provided funding for a part-time nanny to help during the most demanding hours of the day. The third family included both grandparents, Maria and Antonio Rossi, who had immigrated from Italy 30 years earlier and who were now raising their 3 teenage grandchildren after their daughter died from cancer. The teenagers were struggling academically and emotionally, and the grandparents felt overwhelmed by the challenge of helping them navigate both their grief and the typical challenges of adolescence. Rose's legacy had arranged for family therapy, tutoring services, and a support group specifically for teenagers being raised by grandparents. As Catherine read through these stories, she was reminded again of why this work mattered so much. Each family's situation was unique, but they all shared the common experience of having their lives completely transformed by circumstances beyond their control. The grandparents had stepped up without hesitation because love demanded it, but they needed support to succeed in their unexpected roles as primary caregivers. The Riverside Community Centre was a modest building that served as a hub for various social services in the neighborhood. Catherine was greeted by Sarah Mitchell, the center's director, who had become one of Catherine's key partners in implementing the charity's programs. "Your Royal Highness, we're so grateful you could visit today," Sarah said as they walked toward the family meeting room. "All three families are excited to meet you, and they've prepared some things they want to share about how the charity has helped them." Catherine appreciated that Sarah had prepared the families for the visit without creating unrealistic expectations. One of the challenges of royal visits was ensuring that they felt genuine rather than performative, and Sarah had worked hard to create an atmosphere where families could speak honestly about their experiences. Dorothy Williams was waiting in the community center's small sitting room with her grandchildren, Lucy and Michael. Dorothy stood as Catherine entered, but Catherine immediately gestured for her to remain seated, choosing instead to take a chair across from the family in a casual circle rather than maintaining any formal distance. "Mrs. Williams, it's wonderful to meet you," Catherine said warmly. "And, Lucy and Michael, I've heard such good things about both of you." Lucy, the 11-year-old, had clearly been coached to speak but seemed genuinely excited rather than nervous. "Your Royal Highness, we wanted to thank you for starting the charity that's been helping our grandmama. She was worried about money before, but now she smiles more." Catherine felt her heart constrict with emotion. Children were often the most honest observers of how stress affected the adults in their lives. "I'm so glad to hear that, Lucy. What's your favorite thing about living with your grandmother?" "She makes the best pancakes," Michael, the 8-year-old, chimed in. "And she knows how to braid hair really good, even though she had to watch YouTube videos to learn how." Dorothy laughed, her face showing both embarrassment and pride. "I never had daughters, Your Royal Highness, so when Lucy came to live with me, I realized I had no idea how to do girl things. The internet has been my best friend for learning everything from hairstyles to helping with homework I haven't seen in decades." Catherine was struck by Dorothy's resilience and adaptability. "What has been the most challenging part of this new role?" Dorothy considered the question carefully. "The physical demands, honestly. I'm not 70 anymore, wait, I am 70, she laughed. But, seriously, keeping up with their energy while also managing all the emotional support they need has been exhausting. The respite care that the charity arranged has been a lifesaver. Knowing that I can have 6 hours on Saturday afternoons to grocery shop or just rest has made everything more manageable." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Catherine asking thoughtful questions about everything from school performance to social activities to financial planning. She learned that Lucy had joined the school choir and was thriving with the confidence boost it provided, while Michael had struggled more with the transition but was beginning to open up in therapy sessions funded by the charity. The second visit was with James Patterson and his grandson Tommy. James was a retired electrician whose practical approach to problem-solving had served him well in his new role as primary caregiver, but who admitted he often felt out of his depth when dealing with Tommy's emotional needs. "I can fix anything in this house," James told Catherine as Tommy played with blocks nearby, "but when this little one has a meltdown because he misses his mummy, I feel completely helpless." Catherine watched Tommy, noting how he seemed secure and content despite the challenges his young life had already presented. "But look how happy and safe he seems with you." "That's not an accident, Mr. Patterson. Children sense love and security, and it's clear that Tommy has both of those things in abundance." James's face softened as he watched his grandson stack blocks with intense concentration. "The support group has been incredible. Meeting other grandfathers going through similar situations made me realize I'm not the only one who has no idea what I'm doing half the time. We share tips, watch each other's grandchildren sometimes, and just listen when someone needs to talk." Catherine made notes about the success of the peer support groups, recognizing that this organic community building was one of the most valuable services Rose's legacy was providing. "Have you had any contact with Tommy's parents?" "His father calls when he can from Afghanistan, which isn't often enough for any of us. His mother is getting better slowly, but she's not ready to be a full-time parent yet. Tommy sees her once a week with a social worker present, and those visits are getting easier for everyone." The complexity of Tommy's situation reminded Catherine why comprehensive support was so important. This wasn't just about providing childcare or financial assistance, it was about helping families navigate complicated emotional, legal, and logistical challenges while prioritizing the children's well-being. The third visit with the Rossi family presented different challenges altogether. Maria and Antonio spoke English well, but their three teenage grandchildren, Sofia, 16, Marco, 15, and Elena, 14, were struggling with typical adolescent issues complicated by grief and the cultural differences between their grandparents' traditional values and their own desire to fit in with British teenagers. "We love these children like our own," Maria explained to Catherine in accented but clear English. "But teenagers today face problems we never imagined. Social media, different expectations about dating and independence, academic pressure we don't understand. Sometimes we feel like we're from different worlds." Sophia, the oldest, had been quiet during most of the conversation but finally spoke up. "Nana and Nana are amazing, but they worry about everything. They think if I go to a sleepover, something terrible will happen. They don't understand that everyone my age has a mobile phone and that group projects require meeting outside of school sometimes." Catherine recognized the delicate balance between legitimate safety concerns and the normal social development that teenagers needed. "How has the family therapy been helpful in addressing these differences?" Antonio answered thoughtfully. "The therapist helps us talk about our fears, ours and theirs. We're learning that some of our worries come from losing their mother so suddenly. We want to protect them from any more pain, but we're being too protective sometimes." Elena, the youngest, added, "The support group for teenagers has been really good too. Meeting other kids who live with grandparents made me feel less weird. Some of their stories are way harder than ours, and seeing how they cope makes me realize we're actually pretty lucky." Catherine spent another half hour with the Rossi family, learning about the specific challenges faced by teenagers in grandparent care and the importance of age-appropriate support services. By the time she left the community center, Catherine had pages of notes about program improvements and expansion opportunities. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Catherine time to process everything she had heard. The visits confirmed that Rose's legacy was making a real difference in these families' lives, but they also highlighted how much more work needed to be done. The demand for services was growing faster than they could expand, and Catherine knew she would need to increase fundraising efforts and seek additional partnerships to meet the need. That evening, as Catherine sat in her study working on a speech for the upcoming fundraising gala, she found her gaze drawn to Rose's emerald coat hanging nearby. The garment seemed to embody everything Catherine had learned about service, sacrifice, and the power of intergenerational love. Catherine picked up her phone and scrolled through the photos from the day's visits, stopping at a picture of Tommy Patterson hugging his grandfather after successfully building a tall tower with his blocks. The pure joy on both their faces captured everything Rose's legacy was working to protect and support. 3 months after that meaningful Christmas day, Catherine understood that wearing Rose's coat had been just the beginning. The real tribute to her grandmother's memory was the ongoing work of supporting families, the daily commitment to turning grief into positive action, and the recognition that love takes many forms but always requires both courage and community support to flourish. Catherine returned to her speech, writing about the hundreds of families who had already been touched by Rose's legacy and the thousands more who would benefit as the charity continued to grow. She wrote about the grandmother she had met that morning who was learning to braid hair from YouTube videos, the grandfather who was building support networks with other caregivers, and the teenagers who were finding their way through grief with help from peers who understood their unique situation. As Catherine finished her speech, she made a mental note to call Dorothy, James, and the Rossi family in a few weeks to check on their progress. These weren't one-time visits for her, they were the beginning of relationships that would continue as long as the families found them helpful. The emerald coat would be worn again at the June gala, carrying with it not just the memory of Rose but the stories of all the families whose lives had been changed by her legacy. Catherine smiled as she imagined Rose's reaction to knowing that her influence was still growing, still making a difference, still creating ripples of positive change in the world. The coat was more than a tribute to the past, it had become a symbol of hope for the future, representing the belief that love, passed down through generations and shared within communities, could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. And that, Catherine knew, would have made Rose proud beyond measure.